These are fake. You're not boarding this flight. Patricia Hendricks, a 41-year-old gate agent, towered over three small bodies that trembled but refused to back down. Jordan, Kennedy, and Cameron Richardson. 10 years old. Two boys and a girl. Their small shoulders touched, holding each other up as the fluorescent airport lights cast harsh shadows across their tear-stained faces. Kennedy's voice shook but cut through the chaos. "Those are our tickets. You can't do that." Jordan thrust forward a manila folder bulging with papers. "We have everything. Our unaccompanied minor forms, our IDs, everything." But Patricia sneered, and there was no other word for the expression that twisted her face. "I don't care what papers you have. I know trouble when I see it." Soon, the airport police arrived, radios crackling. Patricia pointed at the children like she was identifying criminals. "These three are trying to board with fraudulent documents." Cameron, the quietest of the three, stood with tears streaming down his face, but his voice carried in the chaos. "We just want to see our dad. It's his birthday." From the crowd, a white woman's voice cut through, sharp and cruel. "Probably don't even have a father. These kids are clearly running some kind of scam." Karen Whitmore, a 52-year-old woman wearing expensive athleisure wear and designer sunglasses. She stood there with her first-class boarding pass, adding her voice to the cruelty. The crowd pressed closer. Dozens of phones recorded. Some passengers defended the children, others muttered about better safe than sorry. The airport terminal held its breath, waiting to see what would happen to three black children being treated like criminals. Patricia drew herself up, delivering her verdict. "That's it. You're going to miss this flight and every other flight today." Jordan's voice cracked, becoming a desperate plea. "Please, our dad is waiting for us. We can't miss it." The terminal speakers crackled to life. "Captain J. Richardson, please report to Gate 47 immediately. Captain J. Richardson to Gate 47, emergency." But what Patricia didn't know, what none of these people judging these children knew, was that in less than 5 minutes, everything was about to change. If you want to see what happened when Captain Richardson arrived at Gate 47, you need to subscribe right now. Hit that button, because this story is about to take a turn that nobody saw coming. If you stand against discriminating children, comment yes in the comments and tell us where you're watching from. Now let me take you back to where this day really began. To understand what happened at Gate 47, you need to know how three 10-year-old children ended up standing alone at an airport gate, fighting for the right to visit their father's grave. 6 hours earlier, Captain Jasmine Richardson stood in her kitchen in jeans and a sweater, flipping pancakes while her three children buzzed around her like excited bees. She was 39 years old, and on this morning, she wasn't a captain. She wasn't the woman who commanded a Boeing 737 with 157 passengers. She was just a mom, making breakfast for her babies on what was supposed to be a special day. Today, Jordan, Kennedy, and Cameron would fly alone for the first time. They were headed to Washington, D.C. to visit their father's grave at Arlington National Cemetery. Tomorrow, October 25th, would have been Marcus Richardson Sr.'s 42nd birthday. Their father, Lieutenant Commander Marcus Richardson of the United States Navy, was gone for 3 years now. He was killed in a training accident at Naval Air Station Oceana when his children were only 7 years old. He left behind a wife who had to learn how to be both mother and father, and 3 children who had to learn how to grow up without their daddy. For 6 months, the triplets had been planning this trip. 6 months of circling the date on the calendar, of talking about what they would say to their dad, of being brave enough to do something that scared them because they wanted to honor him. They wanted to spend his birthday at his grave, to tell him about school, about their lives, about how much they missed him. His best friend from the Navy, Derek Williams, would meet them in D.C. and take them to Arlington where Hinkseth. They would lay flowers and salute like he taught them. Jasmine had always kept her 2 worlds separate. It wasn't dramatic or intentional, really. She was just private by nature. At work, she was Captain Richardson, professional, focused, excellent at what she did. At home, she was mom. She didn't post her kids on social media. She didn't bring them to airline events. She kept her professional life and her home life in completely separate worlds. Her colleagues knew she had children. They had seen photos on her phone during breaks, had heard her mention them in passing. But that was it. No names at work functions, no pictures in the crew lounge, no integration of her two identities. It was just who she was. She believed in boundaries, in privacy, in protecting her children without making a big deal about it. After Marcus died and the media circus that followed, she had become even more protective of their privacy. She wanted them to just be kids, not the pilot's kids, or the kids whose dad died. The triplets were as different as 3 children could be. Jordan, the oldest by 3 minutes, was analytical and responsible. He was the one who made lists and checked them twice, who remembered everyone's birthdays, who organized their closets by color. Kennedy was fiery and confident, never backing down from a challenge, always ready to speak her mind. And Cameron was gentle and observant, the one who felt everything deeply, who noticed when someone was sad before they said anything, who still slept with the stuffed airplane their father had given him. That morning, they gathered around the kitchen table with a printed checklist that Jordan had made. He read through it with the seriousness of a military officer preparing for deployment. Passports, unaccompanied minor forms, copies of birth certificates, Dad's memorial service details, hotel confirmation with Uncle Derek. Kennedy rolled her eyes, stabbing at her pancakes. "Jordan, we have everything. Stop worrying." The paperwork was thorough because Jasmine had made absolutely sure of it. She had spent weeks preparing everything, paranoid about missing even the smallest detail. The unaccompanied minor forms were properly filled out and notarized. She had included contact information for both herself and Derek Williams, who would meet them at Reagan National. There was medical information in case of emergencies, permission letters authorizing their travel, copies of their birth certificates, even a letter from their school confirming they had permission to miss a day of classes. Everything any airline could possibly need, and then some. She had triple-checked every document, every phone number, every detail. She was flying the same route but leaving 90 minutes earlier. She would be in the air when they boarded, already halfway to DC when they took off. It gave her comfort knowing she would be in the sky with them, even if they were on different planes. She kissed each of them that morning, her hands lingering on their faces like she was memorizing them. "You have everything you need. You know what to do. Stay together, be polite, and remember you're doing this for Daddy." Jordan asked, "Should we call you if anything happens?" Jasmine smiled, brushing his hair back from his forehead. "Of course, but you'll be fine. The airline knows you're coming. Everything's arranged. I called them twice to confirm. You're in the system as unaccompanied minors. They'll take good care of you." What she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that in a few hours, everything would go so terribly wrong that her children would need her desperately, and she wouldn't be able to answer her phone because it would be locked in a cockpit locker while she prepared for takeoff. The children didn't want to bother her anyway. They knew she would be working, knew she would be the captain, knew she would have a whole plane full of passengers depending on her. Besides, they were determined to prove they could do this. They were big kids now, brave kids, their daddy's kids. He had been fearless, and they wanted to be fearless too. Their grandmother Dorothy arrived to drive them to the airport. She was 65, a retired schoolteacher who had lived through the civil rights movement, who had marched in Selma, who had seen too much and knew too much about how the world worked. She looked at her 3 grandbabies with their matching backpacks and felt a knot of worry in her stomach that she couldn't quite explain. She watched them walk into the terminal, 3 small figures with matching backpacks, holding hands in a chain the way they always did. Jordan in the middle, Kennedy on his right, Cameron on his left, ready to be brave for their father, ready to prove they were growing up. Dorothy sat in her car for a moment, watching until they disappeared through the automatic doors. Something felt wrong, but she couldn't put her finger on it. It was just a feeling, just a mother's intuition passed down to a grandmother's worry. She shook it off, put the car in drive, and headed home. She didn't know that in less than 2 hours, she would be racing back to this same airport, her hands shaking on the steering wheel, tears streaming down her face, after receiving a phone call that would make her heart stop. She didn't know that her worst fears, the ones she couldn't even put into words that morning, were about to come true. Before we continue, hit that subscribe button right now, because what happens next at that airport will break your heart before it makes you believe in justice again. And tell me in the comments, would you let your 10-year-old fly alone? Why or why not? None of them knew. Not Jasmine, who was already at the airport preparing for her own flight, running through her pre-flight checklist with her usual precision. Not Dorothy, who was driving home, trying to shake off that feeling of unease. And certainly not the triplets, who walked confidently through the terminal with their perfectly organized folder of documents, excited and nervous and determined to make their father proud. The triplets walked through the automatic doors of Terminal 3 at O'Hare with purpose. Jordan led the way to the check-in counter, the manila folder clutched in his hands like it contained state secrets. Tom Phillips, the agent at the counter, looked up as Jordan slid the folder across. "Wow, you three have quite the folder here. First time flying alone?" Jordan stood a little straighter. "Yes, sir. Our mom made sure we had everything." Tom opened the folder and his eyebrows went up. "She certainly did. Unaccompanied minor forms, contact info, medical records. This is perfect. You're all set." He processed their tickets and paused, smiling. "First class, 3 seats together. Someone loves you very much." Tom's expression softened. He didn't ask questions, just handed over their boarding passes like he was presenting medals. "Well, you 3 are going to have a great flight. Gate 47. Stay together, and if you need anything, find any airline employee. We're here to help." At security, TSA agent Marcus Brown, a black man in his mid-40s, called them forward. Well, triplets, and very organized ones. These your papers?" He checked their documents and smiled. "Your parents raised you right. Have a safe flight, kids." The triplets beamed. They had done it. Check-in, done. Security, done. They arrived at Gate 47 40 minutes early. The gate area buzzed with business travelers, families, and college students. The triplets found 3 seats together. Jordan went through the folder again. Kennedy played a game on her tablet. Cameron read his book about naval aviation. They were model children. Quiet, respectful, bothering no one. But they were getting stares. A white woman in expensive yoga pants clutched her purse closer when Cameron reached for his backpack. A businessman in a gray suit kept glancing at them, his eyes narrowing, like their presence required an explanation. But there were kind faces too. A young black woman in scrubs, Angela Davis, smiled warmly at them. "You kids traveling alone?" Kennedy looked up. "Yes, ma'am, first time." Angela's smile widened. "That's brave." "Good for you. If you need anything, I'm right over there." The triplets felt a strange mix of emotions. Pride, because they were doing this, but also discomfort, an awareness that some people looked at them differently. Cameron noticed how the businessman who watched them suspiciously broke into a huge smile when white kids walked past. He leaned to Jordan and whispered, "Why is that man staring at us?" Jordan glanced over, his stomach tightening. "I don't know. Just ignore it." But it was hard to ignore. They had done everything right. They had all their papers, all their documents. They were sitting quietly, breaking no rules. And yet, they felt watched, judged, assessed. Kennedy felt anger starting to simmer. Why should they feel uncomfortable? They were just kids trying to visit their dad's grave. The minutes ticked by. The gate area filled up more. The triplets stayed in their seats, waiting for boarding to begin. They had no idea that in less than 15 minutes, everything was about to explode. They had no idea that all their preparation, all their documents, all their good behavior was about to mean nothing to a woman who had already decided what she would see when she looked at them. If you're not subscribed yet, hit that button now, because what happens next is going to shock you. And let me ask you, have you ever felt judged before people even knew you? Drop your answer in the comments. Patricia Hendricks arrived at Gate 47 30 minutes before boarding. A 41-year-old woman who had been a gate agent for 16 years and had been passed over for promotion more times than she cared to count. She was bitter about it, suspicious of everyone, convinced the world was full of people trying to scam the airline she worked for. She scanned the gate area as she set up her computer, and her eyes landed immediately on the triplets sitting together quietly with their matching backpacks. 3 black children, alone, with expensive-looking backpacks, and her suspicion was instant. She kept glancing at them as she prepared for boarding, and finally, she approached them with a look that made all three children tense up. "Excuse me, are you three traveling alone?" Jordan stood politely and answered, "Yes, ma'am. We're unaccompanied minors flying to Chicago." Patricia's eyes narrowed as she looked them up and down. "I see. And where are your parents?" Kennedy answered honestly. "Our mom is working. Our dad passed away." Patricia's expression didn't soften even slightly at the mention of their deceased father. "Working where?" Cameron shifted uncomfortably and said quietly, "She's at work." Patricia's voice sharpened with irritation. "That's not what I asked. Where are your parents right now? Who dropped you off?" Jordan tried to stay calm and answered, "Our grandmother dropped us off, ma'am." Patricia crossed her arms. "And she just left you here, alone?" Kennedy looked genuinely confused by the question. "We're flying as unaccompanied minors. That's what you're supposed to do." Patricia's face flushed red. "Don't get smart with me, young lady. Let me see your tickets and documentation." They handed over everything without hesitation: their boarding passes, their unaccompanied minor forms, their IDs, everything that Tom Phillips had already verified, everything that was in perfect order. Patricia examined every page with excessive scrutiny, her lips pressed into a thin line, taking far longer than necessary to look at documents that were clearly legitimate. When she saw the first-class seats listed on their boarding passes, her eyes narrowed even more, and you could see the suspicion deepen in her expression. "First class. How did you get first-class tickets?" Jordan answered simply, "Our mom bought them for us." Patricia's tone became accusatory. "Your mom? And what does your mom do that she can afford first-class tickets for 3 children?" Kennedy's frustration was starting to show in her voice. "She works really hard." Patricia snapped back. "That's not an answer. What's her job?" Cameron looked down at his feet and said quietly, "She works for an airline." Patricia's expression turned triumphant, like she had just caught them in a lie that proved everything she suspected. "An airline employee. So these are buddy passes, not purchased tickets?" "That's what I thought." Jordan shook his head firmly. "No, ma'am. They're purchased tickets. You can check." Patricia scanned them into her system, and the computer confirmed exactly what Jordan had said, showing they were purchased tickets, paid for in full, completely legitimate. This seemed to annoy her even more rather than reassure her. "And who gave permission for 3 10-year-olds to fly alone in first class?" Kennedy's voice rose with frustration. "Our mom. She signed all the forms. They're right there." Patricia pointed her finger at Kennedy threateningly. "Don't you raise your voice at me. I'm trying to verify these documents are legitimate." Jordan tried once more to reason with her. "They are legitimate. The agent at check-in verified everything." Patricia's jaw set stubbornly. "I'll be the judge of that. You 3 stay right here. Don't move." She walked back to her desk and picked up the phone, calling her supervisor Michael Torres, and the triplets could hear her voice, tense and insistent, as she spoke. "Michael, I've got 3 unaccompanied minors with first-class tickets. Something doesn't add up." On the other end, Michael sighed with clear exasperation. "What doesn't add up? Are their documents in order?" Patricia responded, "Technically, yes, but the problem is they're 10 years old in first class. The mother supposedly works for an airline, but these aren't buddy passes. The whole situation feels off." Michael's voice was firm through the phone. "Patricia, if their paperwork is valid, then what's the issue?" Patricia insisted, "I'm telling you, something is wrong here. I can feel it. These kids are hiding something." Michael gave her a direct instruction. "Just process them like any other unaccompanied minors. Follow protocol." Patricia hung up, looking completely unsatisfied with that answer. 20 long minutes passed while the triplets sat together, getting more nervous with each minute that ticked by. Cameron whispered to his brother, "Should we call Mom?" Jordan shook his head, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "No, she's probably boarding passengers by now. Let's not bother her." Kennedy watched Patricia suspiciously. "But that lady is being really weird." Jordan tried to reassure them both. "We have all our papers. We're fine. She's just checking things." Other passengers started gathering for boarding, and a white family with teenage kids approached the desk holding their first-class tickets. Patricia's entire demeanor changed in an instant. her face breaking into a warm, welcoming smile. "Welcome. Let me get you boarded right away." There were no questions, no document scrutiny, no demands for phone numbers or explanations, just smiles and efficiency as she processed them through without a single hesitation. Kennedy nudged Jordan and whispered, "Did you see that?" Jordan nodded grimly. "I saw it." Patricia called the triplets over again, her friendly demeanor completely gone as she looked at them. "I need to ask you some more questions. Whose credit card were these tickets purchased with?" Jordan answered patiently. "Our mom's." Patricia continued, "Name on the card?" Jordan replied, "Jasmine Richardson." Patricia leaned forward. "And where is Jasmine Richardson right now?" Cameron's voice was small and tired. "We told you she's at work." Patricia's tone became demanding. "I need a phone number. I need to verify she actually purchased these tickets and gave permission for this travel." Kennedy's frustration boiled over. "It's all in the paperwork. The unaccompanied minor forms have her signature, her contact information, everything." Patricia's voice was cold. "I'll decide what's enough. Phone number. Now." Jordan recited their mom's cell number with a shaking voice. Patricia dialed it right there at her desk, staring at them with suspicion as it rang. It went straight to voicemail because Jasmine's phone was off, locked in a cockpit locker as she prepared for her own flight. Patricia's expression turned even colder. "No answer. That's concerning." Jordan's voice cracked with desperation. "She's working. She can't answer." Patricia crossed her arms and said dismissively, "Convenient." She picked up the phone again, calling Michael back without waiting. "The mother isn't answering. I think we need to hold these children until we can verify guardianship." Michael's voice was strained with frustration. "Patricia, they have notarized documents." Patricia shot back. "Documents can be forged. I'm not letting 3 children board this flight until I speak to a parent." She hung up before he could argue further, and immediately called airport security. "This is Patricia Hendricks at Gate 47. I need security for a potential child welfare situation. 3 unaccompanied minors with questionable documentation." The triplets heard every word she said. Kennedy stood up, her voice alarmed. "We're not questionable. Everything is real." Patricia pointed at her threateningly. "Sit down and be quiet, or I'll have you removed from the airport entirely." Angela, the young woman in scrubs who had smiled at them earlier, stepped forward with concern on her face. "Excuse me, is there a problem? I've been watching, and these kids have been nothing but polite." Patricia didn't even look at her. "This doesn't concern you, ma'am." Angela stood her ground. "I think it does concern anyone who's watching you harass 3 children." Patricia's face reddened with anger. "Harass? I'm doing my job." 2 security officers arrived within minutes. Officer Mike Chen, an Asian American man in his 40s, and Officer Robert Patterson, a white man in his late 30s. Patricia turned to them immediately, her voice dramatic and urgent. "Officers, these 3 children have documents I believe may be fraudulent. They refuse to cooperate, and I cannot reach their mother." Kennedy jumped up from her seat. "We didn't refuse anything. We showed you everything, and our mom's phone is off because she's working." Officer Patterson stepped toward her with his hand raised. "Ma'am, I need you to calm down." Kennedy's voice shook with frustration and tears. "I am calm. I'm telling the truth." Officer Chen held up a hand, his voice more measured and reasonable. "Kids, let's just take a breath. Can you show us your paperwork?" Jordan handed over the entire folder with trembling hands, and Officer Chen flipped through it carefully, his expression growing more confused with each page. "This all looks legitimate. Notarized unaccompanied minor forms, copies of birth certificates, contact information." Patricia interrupted him sharply. "But the mother won't answer her phone." Officer Chen looked at the forms again, studying the contact information section. "The form lists her as employed by this airline. Maybe she's on duty?" Patricia scoffed loudly. "I've worked here for 16 years. I know every employee. I've never heard of a Jasmine Richardson." Jordan's voice was desperate now, pleading with them to understand. "That's because our mom keeps her personal life private. She doesn't talk about us at work." Patricia actually laughed, a cool sound that cut through the growing tension. "That makes no sense. What mother doesn't talk about her children?" Cameron, who had been mostly silent through all of this, spoke quietly but clearly. "A mother who wants us to have a normal life." More passengers were gathering now, drawn by the commotion, and boarding should have started 5 minutes ago. People were checking their watches, getting impatient, and some were starting to complain. And then Karen Whitmore, the woman who had been watching them suspiciously earlier, pushed her way forward through the crowd. "I've been watching these kids. They've been acting suspicious," whispering, looking around nervously. Angela immediately stepped in front of the children protectively. "They're children. They're nervous because you're all treating them like criminals." Karen pointed at them accusingly. "I saw them taking pictures earlier, probably casing the airport." Kennedy's voice rose to a shout, her anger finally breaking through. "We were taking selfies for our dad. It's his birthday." Patricia had clearly heard enough and made her decision. "Officers, I want them detained until we can verify their story." Officer Patterson looked at the documents again, seeming uncertain. "These documents look valid." Patricia's voice was ice cold and final. "I don't care. My gate, my call. They're not boarding this flight." A businessman named Richard Carlson spoke up from somewhere in the crowd. "Thank God someone's finally being vigilant. You never know these days." His wife Susan nodded in agreement. "Exactly. Better safe than sorry." Angela turned on them, her voice sharp with anger. "Safe from what?" "From 3 children going to visit their father's grave." The crowd divided quickly into 2 camps, some passengers defending the children, while others muttered about being careful, about security concerns, about how you just never know these days. Patricia picked up the microphone and made an announcement over the PA system that echoed through the entire terminal. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to have a slight delay due to a security situation. Thank you for your patience." Jordan's voice broke completely as he begged one more time. "Please, we can't miss this flight. It's our dad's birthday tomorrow. We have to be there." Patricia looked down at him with absolutely no sympathy in her expression. "You should have thought of that before you tried to board with suspicious documents." Kennedy screamed at the top of her lungs. "They're not suspicious." Officer Patterson stepped toward them, his voice stern. "That's enough. You need to control yourselves." Cameron was crying openly now, his voice small and broken as he said what they were all thinking. "We're not doing anything wrong. Why won't anyone believe us?" Flight attendant Rachel Morrison arrived at the gate, looking confused by the crowd and the delay. "Patricia, why haven't we started boarding? The captain is asking." Patricia didn't even turn around to look at her. "Tell the captain we have a security situation that needs resolution first." Rachel saw the triplets surrounded by officers, saw the crowd of people watching and filming with their phones, and asked again, "What's going on?" Patricia finally looked at her with absolute certainty in her voice. "These 3 have fraudulent documents." Rachel walked over and looked at the paperwork Officer Chen was still holding in his hands. "These look legitimate to me. Why the delay?" Patricia's voice was final and brooking no argument. "Because I said so. This is my gate." Subscribe right now if you want to see what happens when this gate agent realizes she just made the biggest mistake of her career. And tell me in the comments, if you were in that crowd, would you have spoken up for these children? The terminal speakers crackled to life with that familiar tone that precedes every announcement, and everyone in the gate area looked up, waiting to hear what would come next, an announcement that was about to change everything that was happening at Gate 47. And then Michael Torres arrived. He pushed through the crowd with the kind of urgency that comes from knowing something has gone terribly wrong, his face already showing the horror of someone who understands they're about to walk into a disaster of epic proportions. He was Patricia's supervisor, the man who had told her twice on the phone to just process these children like any other unaccompanied minors, and he could see from 50 feet away that she had ignored every word he'd said. He reached Patricia's desk and held out his hand without a word, and she reluctantly handed him the folder that Jordan had been offering to anyone who would look since this nightmare began. Michael flipped through the pages quickly, his expression growing darker with each document he reviewed. Notarized, unaccompanied minor forms with signatures and dates clearly visible, copies of birth certificates, contact information for both mother and emergency contacts, medical information, permission letters, everything was there. Everything was legitimate. Everything was in perfect order. He looked up at Patricia with disbelief written across his face and said in a voice that carried across the entire gate area that everything was in order and she needed to board these children immediately. Patricia's face went from red to white in an instant. She could hear the finality in his voice, could see the anger in his eyes, could feel her justifications crumbling around her. She had been so sure, so absolutely certain that something was wrong with these children, that they were trying to pull something over on her, on the airline, on everyone. She had built an entire narrative in her head about who they were and what they were doing, and now her supervisor was standing there telling her she was wrong, that she had been wrong from the very beginning, that she had just spent the last 45 minutes terrorizing innocent children for no reason whatsoever. And in that moment, something in Patricia snapped. Whether it was panic or pride or the inability to admit she had made a catastrophic mistake, whether it was the knowledge that her career was probably over or simply the stubborn refusal to back down, even when she was clearly, obviously wrong, Patricia made a decision that would define the rest of her life. She reached across her desk, grabbed the 3 boarding passes that were sitting there with the children's names printed clearly on them, and before anyone could stop her, before anyone could even process what she was about to do, she tore them cleanly in half. The sound of ripping paper cut through every other noise at gate 47. Jordan screamed, "No!" and lunged forward trying to grab the passes from her hands, but it was too late. Kennedy shouted, "Don't, those are ours." But Patricia had already torn them again, quartering them, destroying them beyond any use. Cameron made a sound that wasn't quite words, wasn't quite a cry, just a broken noise that came from somewhere deep in his chest. All 3 children were screaming now, reaching for the destroyed pieces of paper that represented their father's birthday. Their promise to him, their entire reason for being brave enough to come to this airport in the first place. Michael stared at Patricia in absolute horror, his voice barely above a whisper as he asked what she had done. What could she possibly have been thinking? Patricia drew herself up with a defiance that would have been impressive if it wasn't so delusional, and declared that she had done her job, that she had protected this flight, that she had stopped 3 children with questionable documentation from boarding an aircraft. Michael's face showed he couldn't believe what he was hearing. Couldn't believe that his employee had just destroyed passenger property, had just guaranteed the airline would be facing a massive lawsuit, had just created a public relations nightmare that would take years to recover from. Officer Chen stepped forward and pointed out in a voice tight with controlled anger that Patricia had just destroyed their property, that what she had done was potentially criminal, that those boarding passes belonged to those children, and she had no legal right to tear them up. Patricia insisted she had every right, that this was her gate and her decision, and she was protecting everyone from what she still insisted was a fraudulent situation. Angela and Emma and dozens of other passengers held up their phones, recording every word, every gesture, every piece of evidence that would show the world exactly what had happened at gate 47. The triplets stood staring at the torn pieces of boarding passes scattered across Patricia's desk like confetti, like the destroyed remnants of their hopes and dreams. Jordan's voice broke as he repeated over and over that they couldn't miss this flight, that they had to get to their dad, that tomorrow was his birthday, and they promised they'd be there. Kennedy was shouting that Patricia had no right, that those were their tickets, that she couldn't just destroy their property because she didn't like them. Cameron had started crying again, silent tears that rolled down his face as he stared at nothing and everything at once. Rachel, the flight attendant who had been watching this entire disaster unfold, made a decision. She grabbed the gate phone and connected directly to the cockpit, her hands shaking so badly she almost dropped the receiver. She knew this was irregular, knew that you didn't disturb the pilots during pre-flight unless it was absolutely critical. But she also knew that what was happening at this gate had crossed every line of decency and someone needed to know right now. In the cockpit of Flight 2847, Captain Jasmine Richardson sat in the left seat going through her pre-flight checklist with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this thousands of times before. She and First Officer David Park were running through their instruments, checking their fuel loads, reviewing their flight plan, doing all the routine things that pilots do to make sure a plane is ready to safely carry human beings through the sky. Her phone was locked in her bag in the cockpit locker, per regulations, and she had no idea that 2 gates away, her children's lives were falling apart. The cockpit phone rang, which was unusual during pre-flight, and David reached over to answer it. His expression changed immediately from routine professionalism to concern, and he said Rachel's name like a question. Jasmine glanced over, mildly curious but not worried yet, and then she heard Rachel's voice through the speaker, shaking and urgent, asking to speak with Captain Richardson directly because there was a situation involving children, involving the Richardson children specifically. Jasmine's blood didn't just go cold, it turned to ice in her veins. Her hand froze on the checklist she was holding, and she asked in a voice that didn't sound like her own what had happened. Were they hurt? What was going on? Rachel's words tumbled out in a rush, explaining that the gate agent had called security on 3 children, that she had refused to let them board, that she had just torn up their boarding passes, that the children were surrounded by police and crying and asking for their mother. Jasmine's professional composure, that calm captain's demeanor that she wore like armor, completely cracked and fell away, leaving only a terrified mother who had just learned her children were in danger. She unbuckled her seatbelt with shaking hands and told David she had to go. She had to get to her children right now. David looked at her with confusion and surprise, and he admitted he didn't know her kids were on this flight, didn't know they were even at the airport. Jasmine stood up in the cramped cockpit, her pilot's uniform suddenly feeling like a costume, like something that didn't matter at all compared to what was happening to Jordan and Kennedy and Cameron. She said in a voice thick with tears that nobody knew her kids were on the flight because she kept them private, kept them separate from her work life, kept them safe, or at least she thought she had kept them safe, but now she realized she hadn't been able to protect them from this at all. She pushed open the cockpit door and walked through the cabin where passengers were already seated, where flight attendants were doing their safety checks, where everything looked normal and routine while her entire world was ending 2 gates away. Passengers looked up at her with curiosity, wondering why their captain was leaving the plane before takeoff, and she couldn't even see them through the panic that was clouding her vision. Back at Gate 47, the chaos had reached a crescendo. The triplets were surrounded by security, with their torn boarding passes scattered on the floor like evidence of a crime, and all 3 children were crying with the kind of heartbroken devastation that comes from being betrayed by adults who were supposed to protect them. Patricia stood behind her desk, still insisting she had done the right thing, while Michael told her in no uncertain terms that she had just ended her career. The crowd of passengers had grown even larger, with people from other gates drawn by the commotion, and the phones were everywhere, recording everything, preserving this moment for history and for lawyers and for a world that was about to erupt in anger. And then the gate door opened, the door that led from the jetway back into the terminal, the door that passengers walk through to board their flights. That door swung open and Captain Jasmine Richardson emerged into Gate 47. She was in her full uniform with 4 stripes on her shoulders that marked her as a captain, with wings pinned to her chest that she had earned through years of training and excellence, with her hair pulled back and her face set in an expression that somehow managed to combine professional authority with maternal terror. The entire crowd went silent. Not quiet, not hushed, but completely, utterly silent, like someone had hit a mute button on the entire gate area. Every argument stopped mid-sentence, every phone stayed pointed, but every voice went quiet. Every person turned to look at this black woman in a pilot's uniform who had just walked into the middle of a situation that was about to explode in ways nobody had anticipated. Jasmine's eyes swept across the gate, taking in the crowd, taking in the security officers, taking in Patricia standing behind her desk, and then her gaze landed on her children. She saw Jordan with tears streaming down his face. She saw Kennedy shaking with rage and fear. She saw Cameron standing perfectly still with that distant look that meant he had gone somewhere else to escape the pain. She saw the security officers standing over them like they were criminals. She saw the torn pieces of boarding passes on the floor. She saw everything that had been done to her babies while she was sitting in a cockpit completely unaware that they needed her. She screamed their names: Jordan, Kennedy, Cameron, and her voice carried across Gate 47 with the full force of a mother who had just found her children in danger. The children's heads snapped up at the sound of their mother's voice, and they screamed back, "Mommy," with a desperation that broke the hearts of everyone watching. They broke free from the officers who were too shocked to hold them back and ran to their mother with their arms outstretched. And Jasmine dropped to her knees and caught all three of them in an embrace that looked like she was trying to absorb them back into her body, where they would be safe. They were all sobbing together, clinging to each other, and Jasmine was frantically running her hands over them, checking for injuries, asking if they were hurt, telling them she was here now and everything would be okay. Jordan tried to explain through his tears that Patricia had torn their tickets, that they couldn't go to Dad's birthday now, that they had tried so hard to do everything right. Kennedy was saying over and over that the gate agent wouldn't listen, that they showed her everything, that nobody would believe them. Cameron just held on to his mother and shook, unable to form words, unable to do anything but feel the safety of her arms around him after the terror of the last hour. Jasmine pulled back slightly to look their faces, to check their wrists where they had been restrained, to make absolutely sure her children were physically unharmed, even though she could see clearly that they were emotionally devastated. She saw the torn boarding passes scattered on the floor near Patricia's desk, and her expression underwent a transformation that everyone in Gate 47 would remember for the rest of their lives. The devastated mother who had been crying became something else entirely, became the captain who commanded respect and authority, became a black woman who had spent her entire career proving she belonged in spaces where people said she didn't, became a force that would not be moved or intimidated or dismissed. She stood up slowly, still holding Cameron, who had wrapped himself around her and refused to let go. And she turned to face Patricia Hendricks with an expression of cold fury that made the gate agent take an involuntary step backward. Patricia's face showed horror and recognition, and the dawning realization that she had just made the worst mistake of her life. She stammered that she was Captain Richardson, that she didn't know those were the captain's children, that if she had known, she would have handled things differently, that she was sorry, that she didn't mean for any of this to happen. Jasmine's voice when she finally spoke was quiet, but it carried across the entire gate with perfect clarity. And she said with ice in every word that those were her children, her 10-year-old children, who Patricia had terrorized and whose property she had destroyed. She said Patricia had called security on babies, had accused them of fraud, had torn up their boarding passes that would have taken them to visit their father's grave. And she had done all of this because she looked at 3 black children and decided they were criminals before they ever opened their mouths. Subscribe right now, because what Captain Richardson says next will give you chills, and this gate agent is about to learn that you don't mess with a mother's children. Drop a comment and tell me, what would you have said to Patricia if you were in Captain Richardson's shoes? Patricia tried to stammer out more apologies and explanations, but Jasmine wasn't done, wasn't even close to done. And the reckoning that was about to happen at Gate 47 would make national news before the sun set that day. Jasmine looked at Patricia with an expression that could freeze fire and asked her a simple question in a voice so quiet the entire gate had to strain to hear it. "Do you know what tomorrow is?" Patricia stammered and shook her head, terrified to find out where this was going. Jasmine's voice remained steady and cold as she revealed that tomorrow, October 25th, would have been her husband's 42nd birthday. That Lieutenant Commander Marcus Richardson Sr., United States Navy, had been a naval aviator who died in a training accident 3 years ago. and that her children had been flying to Washington, D.C. to visit his grave at Arlington National Cemetery. She turned slightly so everyone could see the backpacks with Marcus's photo pinned to each one, that handsome face in navy dress whites looking out at a world he had died protecting. Jasmine explained that her children had planned this trip for 6 months, that they had been brave enough to fly alone because they wanted to honor their father on his birthday, and that Patricia had tried to take all that away from them based on nothing but prejudice. Patricia stammered that she didn't know, that if she had known about their father, she would have handled things differently. Kennedy's voice cut through like a whip as she shouted that they had told Patricia everything, that they had showed her all their documents. But Patricia had refused to believe a single word they said. Patricia tried to defend herself by saying she was just being careful, trying to protect the flight. Jasmine's voice rose as she demanded to know what Patricia had been careful of. What possible threat 3 10-year-old children with perfectly legitimate documentation could have posed. Jasmine picked up the pieces of torn boarding passes from the floor, holding them up so everyone could see the destroyed paper. She asked with ice in every syllable what authority Patricia had to destroy these passes. What gave her the right to tear up property that belonged to 3 children? Patricia was crying now, insisting that she thought she was protecting the flight, that she believed the documents were fraudulent. Jasmine's response was devastating, as she asked if Patricia had been protecting the flight from 3 10-year-olds trying to honor their deceased father. Officer Chen stepped forward and apologized to Jasmine and her children for his role in what had happened, admitting he should have questioned Patricia's judgment more thoroughly. Jasmine acknowledged his apology with a slight nod, then turned to face Michael Torres and stated that Patricia would be fired today, or she would walk off this plane and never fly for this airline again. Michael nodded immediately, assuring her that Patricia's employment would be terminated and there would be a full investigation. Jasmine then addressed the crowd, thanking Angela and Denise and Emma and the others who had spoken up for her children, who had tried to intervene, who had recorded everything. Then her gaze hardened as she looked at Karen Whitmore and Richard Carlson and the others who had added their voices to the cruelty. When Karen tried to slip away, Denise blocked her path and Kennedy pointed at Karen, revealing that this woman had said they probably didn't even have a father. Richard Carlson stepped forward with genuine shame and apologized directly, but Jasmine told him he had looked at her husband's children and seen criminals, and to remember that shame and let it change how he saw the world. Jasmine pulled out the dog tags she wore, the ones that had belonged to Marcus Sr., holding them up so everyone could see. She explained that her husband had died defending a country that apparently didn't always honor or protect his children the way they deserved. Her voice broke as she explained that she had kept her kids private to protect them, that she had thought privacy would keep them safe. But she realized now there was no private space safe enough to protect Black children from people who had already decided what they would see. Cameron spoke quietly that she had protected them, that this wasn't her fault. Jasmine looked down at him with tears streaming and said it wasn't enough, that her children would carry this trauma for the rest of their lives. Denise stepped forward, identifying herself as an attorney and offering to represent the Richardson family in legal action. Rachel asked Jasmine what she wanted to do about the flight, and Jasmine looked at her 3 children and asked if they still wanted to go to Washington, if they wanted to visit their father's grave tomorrow. Jordan answered that they had to go, that they had promised Dad and weren't letting anyone take that away. Kennedy nodded fiercely, saying they weren't letting these people win. Cameron whispered that he wanted to see Dad's grave, that he needed to be there tomorrow. Jasmine told Michael Torres to issue new boarding passes immediately, right now. First-class seats exactly as booked. Patricia begged Jasmine to reconsider, saying she would lose her job, that she had bills and a mortgage. Jasmine turned with no sympathy and said coldly that Patricia should have thought about that before terrorizing children, that Patricia's mistake would give her children nightmares for years. Jasmine took the new boarding passes from Michael and holding her children's hands, began walking toward the jetway. The entire gate watched in silence. Then slowly one person started clapping, then another, until half the gate erupted in applause for this black woman in a pilot's uniform and her 3 brave children refusing to let hatred steal their father's birthday. She walked them onto the plane and personally settled each child into their first-class seats, asking flight attendants Rachel and James to watch over them with special care. Cameron begged her not to leave, and Jasmine knelt beside his seat, promising she would be right up front, flying them safely to their dad. Jordan asked what would happen to Patricia, and Jasmine told him justice would happen, but right now he should focus on being okay. Kennedy apologized for not revealing their mom's identity earlier, and Jasmine grabbed her face and told her fiercely that this was not their fault, that they had no obligation to reveal anything about their family, that the blame belonged entirely to the adults who chose cruelty. Jasmine picked up the PA microphone, and her voice echoed through the plane as she explained there had been an incident at the gate involving her children. She identified herself as Captain Jasmine Richardson, with 17 years of experience and over 15,000 flight hours, one of less than 150 black female commercial pilots in the United States. She declared that her children deserved to fly first class, deserved to exist without justifying their presence, and that everyone needed to understand what they had witnessed and what needed to change about how they saw the world. The flight took off smoothly, and during the journey, passengers who had been cold earlier found their courage. An elderly woman named Margaret told the triplets their mother was remarkable. Other passengers offered quiet apologies. Cameron slowly came back to himself, pressing his face against the window, watching clouds drift by. Kennedy held his hand, and Jordan held Kennedy's, and they flew toward their father, toward the promise they made 6 months ago. 1 month later, the videos had gone viral, sparking national outrage about racial profiling. Patricia was fired and faced a civil rights lawsuit. Officer Patterson was suspended, while Officer Chen publicly apologized. The airline CEO issued a personal apology and implemented new anti-bias training policies. A federal investigation was launched into racial profiling at airports. The Richardson family reached a settlement and donated half to organizations fighting for children's rights. 3 months later, the triplets were in therapy with Dr. Patel, processing their trauma. Cameron had nightmares, Jordan was overly protective, Kennedy channeled her anger into activism. At a park, the family played together but noticed stares differently now, with wariness that hadn't existed before. Jasmine told them stories about their father, facing the same discrimination throughout his military career. When Cameron asked if his dad would be mad at them, Jasmine promised their father would be incredibly proud of how brave they had been. 6 months later, the Richardson family flew again from a different airport, where staff went out of their way to make them feel welcome. Jordan saw a black pilot who encouraged him to pursue aviation if he loved it. They boarded, and as they took off, Cameron said it was still beautiful up here. Kennedy agreed no one could take this from them. Jasmine held all their hands and said nobody could take away their right to fly. The plane climbed through clouds as Jasmine's voice explained that her children learned the world would judge them before knowing them, but they also learned they were loved, protected, and worthy. They flew because they belonged in the sky, because their father had flown, and because she flew, and there was no space where they didn't have just as much right to be as anyone else. A dedication honored every child made to feel they didn't belong, and a final photo showed the happy Richardson family before any of this happened. All 4 of them smiling, full of love and hope for a brighter future. If this story moved you, subscribe now and share it with someone who needs to hear it. See you in our next video.